Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 2021 General Meeting of the Council of Fort Lauderdale Civic Associations. I want to thank everyone for taking their time to be with us tonight. And we have an exciting agenda and an important series of topics to cover. Here is our agenda for the evening. We'll call to order at 6:30. Mary, our first vice president, will conduct roll call, general membership updates, and then you can see we have 3 presentations this evening. And these are our regular presenters, Chris Lagerblum, Dr. Rader, and then the topic of the hour, an overview of P3s. And if Golden Heights shows up, we're going to welcome them as well. And then we'll round things off in the usual manner with the treasurer's report and review and acceptance of prior month's meeting minutes. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to First Vice President Peliquin to conduct the roll call of the board members.
All right, well, once again, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and do roll call of the excuse me, board members. So if I could start with Michael Albetta.
I am here.
Okay. Melinda Bauer, she is excused. Louis Castillo.
Present.
Okay. Jim Concanon.
I am here.
Kathy Stubbs.
Here.
Abby Laughlin.
Here.
Oh, very good. Colleen obviously is here. Marilyn Mano.
Present.
Barbara McGill. Barbara McGill. I don't see her yet. Mary Peliquin, I am present. Frankie Lane.
Here.
Thank you, Frankie. And Dennis Ulmer.
Present.
I'll keep an eye out for Barbara. And if you would, anybody else from any other neighborhood, if you didn't hear me before, if you would, just put your name and the neighborhood that you are from in the chat. I can just check off that you all did attend, and I appreciate it. So we can go ahead, Colleen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. So I do not see JJ or Chris here yet. So,
I'm here.
Who's here? JJ?
Yes.
JJ Hankerson, thank you so much. I'm referring to Dr. JJ Rader, who gives
Okay.
welcome, Mr. Hankerson. So Larry and Jim, if you could keep an eye out for Dr. Rader. Chris also notified me that he is running a little late this evening. So we actually may jump down to talking about P3s to kick us off. And Lee and Alan, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you be okay if you actually went first on the agenda as opposed to third?
No problem with me.
No, that's, I can't deal with the change and the pressure.
I'll cover for Alan. We'll be good.
For those who know me, I'm a jokester. That's fine. Let's do it.
Okay, Michael, you have your hand raised?
Yes, Madam President, as the parliamentarian, I know that you read the guidelines or you explained the guidelines regarding this specific topic. If you can do it once more since we're on recording, and I appreciate it, so the audience would know. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm about to do that. So P3s, it's the topic of the moment. Tonight's conversation is not intended to address or talk about specific pros or cons of specific city projects. Instead, tonight is about providing a high-level overview of P3s, what they mean, how they work, the pros and cons, and how to build stronger partnerships that benefit all partner entities. So the format for the evening is going to be, each speaker is going to be asked to answer 5 questions, and then we're going to hand it over to our members to ask questions. We respectfully ask that members tonight put their questions in the chat. We're going to try to get to all of them. And if we do not answer your question tonight, we are happy to revisit this at a future meeting. This is an important topic for all of us to get to know and better understand. And thank you, Vice President Albetta, for acting as parliamentarian. Appreciate that. So we have two fabulous speakers, the first of which is Assistant Broward County Administrator Alan Cohen. I have a few points about him listed here. You can see he's been with the county since 2015, but comes with 30 plus years of management experience in both the public and private sector. In terms of prior public roles, he was the city manager in Sunrise, the city manager of Sunny Isle Beach, and the mayor and manager of the city of Ithaca, New York. He has either led or been integrally involved in redevelopment projects totaling more than $5 billion. Current responsibilities include significant development projects, including the convention center expansion and the development of the new joint government center. So in partnership between the county and the city of Fort Lauderdale. Educationally, highly credentialed Bachelor of Science in Business Management from Cornell, and earned an MBA in Paris. And we'll have to talk about how that happened, because we're all jealous about that. But welcome, Alan, our next speaker, equally robust credentials. Lee Weintraub is the vice chair for the firm's construction law and litigation group. He's also the chair of the firm's public-private partnerships group. He also is an adjunct professor of construction law at Nova College of Law, and the youngest recipient ever of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Florida Bar's Construction Law Committee. And Florida Trend Magazine named him not once, but twice, one of Florida's legal elite. And this is an honor limited to the top 2% of Florida's lawyers. In terms of experience in public-private projects, he's the lead drafter for the state statute. He was also the lead counsel for two big projects, LSU's Foundation Development Project, the government of Puerto Rico on a student housing development project, and he trained the governments of 8 Asian countries in public-private partnerships. He earned a BA, a BS, and a JD with honors from the University of Florida. So super, super thrilled to have both of you here tonight. We appreciate your robust subject matter expertise and deep experience in the space. So with that, what we're going to do, as I said, is each speaker will be asked to answer 5 questions, and then we'll transition to Q&A from the membership. And you'll see each question put up, and then we're going to take it down. Lee and Alan, we didn't talk about this, who goes first and who goes second. So why don't we just toggle back and forth? Maybe Lee, you can answer the first one first, and then Alan, you answer the second one first, etc. So are you guys ready? Here we go. I wanted to put this quote up. This is from an HBR article from 2019. This is such a central point for tonight's conversation. And I just want to read it out loud, because this is the basis for a lot of what we're going to talk about. At the crux of successful P3 infrastructure projects is a simple yet difficult to achieve construct. Each party must be as committed to achieving the other's goals as they are to their own. So what's missing in this graphic is this P3 means there's 3 partners. You've got the public sector, which is our municipality, and then the private investment, and then the community itself. So this represents kind of public as the municipality and the community, and the private investment down below. But everyone wants to achieve objectives. So again, here we go with the first question. Top level, pretty strong. What are the pros and cons of P3s? I'll stop sharing and turn the floor over to you, Lee.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having Alan and me. We appreciate the opportunity to address this with you. And so the pros and cons of P3s, it's a very vast question. Obviously, there's a whole lot of involved in the answer, but let me start by backing up for 1 second and stressing with the P3s, the operative word in public-private partnership is the partnership. And there's been a progression of P3s in the government, especially here in Florida, but really all around the US, where as governments were first figuring out how to do it, there was a lot of privateering, there were some backroom deals, there were really bad deals, but P3s over the decades have really taken on a level of sophistication and transparency that wasn't there in the early stages. And a lot of the stigma about P3s have worn away because the partnerships have gotten stronger. The public sector has gotten more sophisticated in how to do it. The private sector has gotten more sophisticated in how to share better with the public sector. The transparency has gotten better. The community understanding of P3s has gotten better. And what's emerged from there is a lot less of the awkwardness and even some of the just straight up bad deals. And now those are really the extreme exception. Right now, it's really all about how the public and private sector come together in a marriage and they truly partner to deliver either a public facility or something for a public use. And you'll find the vast majority of them, including some of the projects Alan's working on right now, are really good examples of that. And so to answer the question about the pros of P3s, it really comes out of the partnership. You know, what do you hope to get out of the partnership from the public sector? And I'll submit that generally speaking, there are three strong pros of a P3. And let me start by saying P3s are not great for every project. They are a tool in a toolbox. And so just like how you won't use a hammer to change a light bulb, you won't use a P3 for every project. But where the project is appropriate, P3s are kind of magical if they're done right. And it happens in three ways. The first that most people focus on is the money, that the private sector is going to bring financing, not funding, because the public sector is going to pay for this or the project will pay for this, but they will bring the initial funding to finance the project. They'll finance the design, they'll finance the construction, they'll finance the operations and maintenance, depending on how this is structured. A popular saying is, if you've seen one P3, you've seen one P3, because every one of them are completely different than the others. It's just different degrees of partnering. But generally, P3s, the private sector will design it, build it, finance it, operate it, and maintain it for a period of decades. And they'll pay for that. And then the public sector will pay over, let's say the life cycle of the project is 30 to 50 years, which is kind of average. Private sector will get paid back over that time period. And so they bring the initial funding and then help the public sector then take that initial funding and leverage it over 30 to 50 years. What that does is two things. Number one, if the public sector doesn't have to pay for the facility in full up front, they're going to pay for it over time. That frees up more money that they can then leverage to go build other assets or do other maintenance or whatever it is. The other is by a formula of payments back to the private sector, we could control their behavior. We can say, a great example is the Miami Tunnel, Port of Miami Tunnel. You may remember in the news shortly after it opened, like literally shortly, I think it was like within a month or two, the fans in the tunnel broke. And when that happened, the private developer got dinged financially with the payback formula. And they got financially punished until they fixed it. And that's an example of how to control the behavior. You control the level of maintenance, you control the level of operations. And so that's the first benefit, is with the money comes the power to control your partner. The second benefit is risk transfer. All these projects have a lot of risk inherent in it. The design may or may not work as intended. Construction costs can go higher than you expected. You may find some unforeseen conditions under the ground when you start digging in it and there's environmental problems. Maybe the facility is not used at the level you expected and not generating the revenue you thought. You could shift some of these risks over to your private sector partner. And so it's a lot less risky to build a project using a proper P3 model than if the public sector just went out and procured it and assumed every one of those risks. And then the last example, and then I'll talk a little bit about the cons, is you leverage the ingenuity of your private partner, because the public sector, folks like Alan, are great at running governments, but they are not developers. They don't know what they don't know. And the best example I can give you, here we are in Broward County, is the 595 reversible lanes, which is a P3 and a very successful P3 at that. Came in under budget, came in ahead of schedule. There were three innovations in that project that never had been done by a Florida Department of Transportation project before, because they didn't know about it. The first is the asphalt mix. The concessionaire who built it is Dragados. They're out of Spain. They built roads like this all over the world. And they knew of an asphalt mix that we've never used here in Florida that's supposed to be more, have a longer life. And we'll find out if it does or not, but they assumed the risk. So if that asphalt fails prematurely, they're going to have to redo it at their cost. The second is if you use those or use 595, out west where the exits are from the highway, you get off 2 roads at a time. So if you're getting off at Hiatus or Flamingo, you'll get off, at one exit. And if you get off at Peters and University, you get off together at another exit. So we're taking twice the number of cars off of the highway as you would if there was one exit after the other. That was something that Dragados has suggested. And then the most fascinating example is, about the overpasses. We've got those overpasses where University Drive crosses over 595 and another one where the Turnpike crosses over 595. And what FDOT's original plan was to demolish those overpasses so the cranes could run through there and lay the road. But Dragados said, this isn't our first rodeo. We've done this before. And they had technology where with a crane, they could lift the overpass road up off the columns, run the cranes underneath it, lay the road, and then just set it back down again. That's nothing that FDOT had ever known about. But as you can imagine, saved a ton of time, saved a ton of money. And when you're partnering with P3s and you're leveraging the design and construction ingenuity of your partner, you're saving money, you're getting more efficient. And so those are generally the pros. With the cons, there are a few. Number one is if you try to use a P3 when it's not an appropriate model for your project. If there's not a good revenue stream that the project will generate to pay back the developer, it'd probably be pretty awkward. Sometimes there's a lot of political opposition to a particular project that maybe isn't appropriate for the private sector to partner on, and that's an issue. The lack of sophistication of some public owners can be an issue. They should have consultants that are guiding them, but especially at the municipal level, you'll find a lot of public owners who try to do it on their own without consultants, and sometimes they don't strike the best deals that they can. It requires a lot of communication with the private sector. Miami-Dade College had a phenomenal P3 opportunity that they put out to bid, but they overvalued their project compared to what the private sector thought it was worth. And they weren't able to get the job done because they thought they should have more money coming back to them than the market said. And so there was a lack of communication, a lack of understanding of the market. So that's a problem too. You have to really have educated partners between the public and the private sector so they can come to the table. Another con is these projects are very multifaceted. They often have a lot of components. You'll have a facility, you'll have a parking solution, you'll have mixed use. You might have some affordable housing going with it. It depends on what it is that you're doing. And the more you do that, the more comparison of bids becomes apples to oranges. So when you go out to bid, you get 4 or 5 different ideas that are drastically different than each other. But the public sector has to somehow figure out which one maximizes the value of the property. And that's complicated. So the market analysis and the financial analysis that goes with it is sometimes tough. And then quite frankly, the role that you all play. Because as community advocates and people who care about where you live, you're a little bit of a watchdog. And it's a good, healthy place to be. And most of the public entities that do this know that there are stakeholders out there and there's the public that they need to satisfy. So a con is the complexity that a watchdog element brings to the formula. So there needs to be some really good, transparent, and frequent communication with the public, let them know what's going on. And with that comes political opposition. And so sometimes we have to overcome that as well. But I've spoken a lot, so I'll let Colleen turn it over to Alan, or I guess, Alan, you're gonna jump in on this question. Is that how we're doing this, Colleen?
Yes, and thank you so much, Lee. That was amazing and deep and comprehensive, and you actually touched on a bit of each of the 5 questions that we're going to pose. So what I'm going to suggest is, Alan, wax philosophic on this question as well, but when we get to the next set of the remaining 4 questions, maybe we keep each response to 2 or 3 minutes for those things that you haven't already covered in the first question. But that was amazing. So Alan, you want to add on to that? That would be wonderful. And by the way, I don't know if I said this, we're very honored to have both of you here. Thank you for being here. Alan, over to you.
Well, it's our honor to be speaking to you, Colleen, and your group. And there are a number of familiar faces in the audience. So hello to all of you. So I'll try not to be too redundant on what Lee talked about. Essentially, he talked about design ingenuity, risk transfer, and Lee, how'd you put the money part of it? Using other people's money or?
Yeah, it's financing, not funding.
Right. So I'll drill down a little on a couple of these and then talk to you about some other things for you to think about. Why local government even considers P3. So I'll start with design. The P3 process lends itself to a design competition, which you don't ordinarily find in government procurement. And that's a benefit, particularly to communities that are looking for different ideas and design alternatives. So as Lee, I think aptly said, to tap into that creative ingenuity that exists in the private sector. Risk transfer is critically important. And he gave you some great examples. You could, if you have a construction project go over budget for whatever reason, the taxpayers are not on the hook. It's your private sector partner. So that's really important. And that extends not only to the design and the construction, but also if you structure the P3 accordingly to your operations and maintenance. It's something that we are contemplating now with the Joint Government Center. For those of you who are not familiar, Broward County and the city of Fort Lauderdale are moving forward with plans to build a new government center together to actually save the taxpayers some money rather than duplicating our efforts in creating redundant infrastructure. And we're looking at having that same party manage, operate, and maintain the building over the long term. We're looking at a new building that's highly resilient, possibly even a net zero building. There will be a lot of new systems with that, systems that we frankly don't have a lot of expertise with. And by having the private sector partner operate those systems, work out the bugs, and be responsible for the long-term maintenance, it's yet another way for us to transfer the risk of the project to them. But let me talk about costs a little more, because in a P3 project, the private sector almost always can build it less expensively. That's often because they're just way more efficient than we are. We're not in the business of building buildings all the time. Okay, the private sector developers that come in, that's what they do. They have that expertise. You know, and Lee spoke to that. So you're typically going to see a lower construction costs. You're going to see lower transaction costs because instead of doing multiple solicitations for a developer and then for a general contractor and possibly even for an O&M provider, you're looking for development teams up front. You're doing one sort of omnibus or consolidated development process, and that results in lower transaction costs. One of the big reasons, frankly, why government considers P3s is, as Lee pointed out, is either we don't have the available funds on hand or we don't have the debt capacity. So we might have enough money flowing into our coffers, but the state of Florida restricts how we can use different revenue streams. And so there's a limit to how much of our income that we bring in we can dedicate to paying off bonds or debt retirement. And this is a way for us to, as Lee pointed out, have somebody else float the money, so to speak. We make what are called in the industry availability payments, and which one of us will explain in a minute. And we're freeing up the rest of our capacity to work on other projects with the limited bonding capacity that we have. And that's very important for governments. Another factor that Lee didn't talk about, and I'll tell you is important to our elected officials, is the factor of time. So the private sector can design, construct, and get you up and running so much quicker. And I'll tell you an anecdote just about the Joint Government Center. When we first approached the internal county construction management division about them building the project, they came back with a schedule of 12 years. Lee, are you surprised by that?
Not at all.
Not at all. And we're literally looking at half the time in the P3 process for the private sector to design and build the exact same project. Government is process oriented to the hilt. We have an element of CYA built into everything that we do. That's use your imagination. And
Arsenal.
yes. And we're just, there are so many reasons why we get in our own way when we do these types of development projects that they take so much longer. And that's a benefit when in the case of the Joint Government Center, City Hall and Government Center East are both aging structures that no longer meet the needs of the government or the governments that are, excuse me, my children just walked in to help me or to access their iPads for their homework. Okay, there you go. Time savings in the development process is a very important issue for us. Another is, and we've kind of alluded to it, but I'll talk organizational capacity. Do we have the capacity to actually implement a project of the size and the complexity that we're talking about with the Joint Government Center? We can build a small office building with our eyes closed. But when it comes to something this large and this complex with the various functions that we're talking about, including in it, that's not something that we do every day. And a great example of that, the other project that I'm working on right now, the Convention Center Expansion and Headquarters Hotel project, we've never built a hotel. Okay, we have no idea how to do that, what needs to go into it. So we brought in the expertise, and we brought in a private sector partner. What's interesting about that, and I can talk more about it probably with some of the other questions, is we started that process as a hybrid public-private partnership. The county was going to fund and own the convention center, and the private partners were going to fund and own the hotel. But after we chose a development team, and we got their financial proposal, the final financial proposal, we realized that it was just too rich for us. And when we went back and looked at least funding it and owning it ourselves, we realized that there was a significant difference. And just to highlight that, because of the difference in the cost of capital and the length of term of the debt, the difference on the debt interest alone was $430 million. So and that's crazy, absolutely crazy, but it's how they assign risk to the project and different tranches that they did. And Lee, coincidentally, they decided to keep the third tranche for themselves and not sell it to the market. And of course, that was like paying the highest rate. And a number of different factors. So you can sometimes go into a P3 and then decide not to do it. And there are different reasons why. But that question of complexity, do you really have the ability to follow through on the project, is an important one. So those are a lot of different reasons why. The why nots, again, Lee did a great job of covering. There could be legal constraints. Lee's an expert on statutory constraints. There are certain ways to do things and certain ways not to do them. There might be a lack of political support for the project. You folks are the experts on that. The numbers might not work. Some P3 people, in the example I just told you, we got a financial proposal and it absolutely did not work for us. So we decided not to do the P3 component of the project, or to do that as a P3. We kept a developer on as a fee developer so that they would still develop the entire project, but we decided that their proposal was too rich. So that could be a negative. And it's not only a matter of being rich, but they might be asking for too much. Sometimes they'll ask for free land, they'll ask for rent abatements, they'll ask for a rent abatement or a tax abatement, sometimes for extended periods of time. And it's just sometimes not worth it. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it's not. You have to do that cost benefit analysis. Colleen, I think I'll stop there. We can handle a lot of other things in our other questions.
Wonderful. So that was deeply rich information from both of you, and I love how you counterbalance one another and complement each other. So thank you so much. We have 4 more questions to get through with you. What I'm going to now ask you to do, if you don't mind, is limit your responses to a minute or 2 for the following questions, so we can allow time for our members to share. So question number 2. We've already talked about the first part of this question. I think maybe just going through a few examples of successful projects from your past or globally that you're aware of. I read in an article that 595 is considered a really successful road infrastructure toll road project. And then, 60 Minutes highlighted their NASA and SpaceX relationship as a fantastic public-private partnership. So we have lots of good examples. Maybe list an example or 2 that you're aware of and why at a high level. So Alan, you're actually going to go first on this question.
Okay, so P3s can make a better city if the project is something that the city needs, if it's something that can catalyze a certain type of development that you're looking for in an area that is not being considered otherwise for development. It could solve a problem. And I'll give you an example. When I was city manager for Sunrise, I'm sure many of you have gone out and shopped at the Sawgrass Mall. And years ago, remember how hard it was to find parking. The holidays was the worst. You were parking on the grass and everywhere else. And things have eased up considerably since they built 2 more parking garages. Well, those 2 parking garages were actually built as a public-private partnership. So we made a deal with Simon, the owner of the mall, to basically it was convoluted, but they leased us the piece of property that the parking garage would go on. We then signed a deal with them to develop the parking garage. And we also created a district, a benefit district, to actually raise funds to pay for the debt of the parking garage. And so we floated the debt. So the debt wasn't on their books, which was a great benefit to them. The fact that we used a benefit district meant that they could legally pass the cost of it through, or at least some of it through, to their tenants, because of the way their leases were structured. And so they were able to get additional garages built, and create a much better atmosphere for everybody out there. And it also helped to alleviate issues that we were hearing about constantly from the neighbors all around the mall. So sometimes a public-private partnership can deal with a problem very small like that, or it could lead to be a catalyst for new development in a part of the city that's currently underserved. Colleen?
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I see that hook.
Send it over to you, Lee.
So Alan's point is well taken that the P3s are good for whatever the public needs. Let me just give you a short list I just put together here of local P3s, just so you can see how multifaceted they are and the kinds of needs that they cover. Alan mentioned the parking at Sawgrass Mills. Terminal 1 at the airport, which is the Southwest Terminal, was a public-private partnership. The International Swimming Hall of Fame that's going on right now is actually my client who's developing it. You've got that going on right now. I already mentioned 595's reversible lanes. Alan talked about the Convention Center Hotel that Broward County is working on right now. Palm Beach County did it already. And in downtown West Palm, they've got a Convention Center Hotel. That's probably the nicest hotel in their downtown. Boynton Beach has a community redevelopment P3 where they are their main drag. Boynton Beach Boulevard, I guess it is. There's all mixed use now that they're building up there. Redid their city hall and preserved a historic school in the process. The Port of Miami Tunnel, which I alluded to earlier, and then the Marlins Ballpark. So that's just right off the top of my head. There are many more. You could see how multifaceted it is, all the different areas of a community it touches. And so where a public sector and private sector get together and work together on the right project, it benefits all levels of a city or a county.
Fantastic, Lee. That was wonderful and great examples. And I think actually we've seen that in the mayor's newsletters or here and there. So question number 3. So we've talked a lot about this. There were some talking points underneath this that I think would be worthy of exploring. In other words, how do we get 3 partners together at the same table? What about an ombudsman role? I mean, how would that work? Someone that doesn't have an agenda that can work, between partners. And how do you go about hashing out differences in an authentic way without, getting too combative about it? Is there a process or an approach that you would recommend beyond the basics of good relationship building? So I guess, Lee, it's your turn to go first on this one.
All right, and it's tough to, those are 2 questions and it's tough to address them in a short answer, but I'll do my best. I've never heard of a P3 where there was a community ombudsman or any third party for that matter as an ombudsman. And I would suspect you're going to get some pretty good resistance, especially from the private sector for something like that. The role of an ombudsman usually comes about during the construction, sometimes actually a lot of times the operation and maintenance phase. And it's a combination of the private and public sector creating some type of an oversight board of the project. The role that you folks play as an ombudsman really happens during the negotiation phase because the power you bring is the political opposition power, and all public sector participants know of this. So if it's done right, they're going to engage the public early, they're going to get input early, and this is where you have your ombudsman role. You kind of use your political pressure to say the project should have this, the project should have that. Don't kill the project if it's a good project, because sometimes that happens just for political reasons and the community suffers. But help it stay in line, help make sure that the deals are appropriate deals. You have a very important role to play. As Colleen mentioned in my bio, when I trained Asian countries, one of them was Nepal, and I spent an entire day training their media on the types of things that I'm training you guys on right now. That's where your role is as the ombudsman. The other question is how to strengthen the alliance, and that's really done, in my opinion, from the risk transfer in exchange for money, because the private sector will take as much risk as you want, but they're going to charge you for it. And so finding the balance of how much risk you're going to let them take, how much you're going to pay for it, and then that just creates enough skin in the game, just enough strain for the private sector that they've got to play. Because if they don't play and things fail, things turn really bad for them really quickly. And so the more trust you're going to give to the private sector partner, and then the more benefit they feel they get for that trust, that to me is really where the alliance is strengthened.
Wonderful, Lee. Thank you so much. Alan?
It's an interesting question and a tough one. So I agree with Lee about the idea of an ombudsman. I also agree that you all have an important role to play. As a former elected official, I'll also tell you that your elected officials also have a very important role to play, because they're your directly elected representatives. And I know just from watching your meetings and attending some of them that your representatives take very seriously that role, and they don't take lightly some of these proposals that are coming forth. It's, you know, if I were kind of designing a process, well, no, first let me tell you one thing, that when I speak at conferences about P3s, one of the things I'm usually either speaking to private sector developers or I'm speaking to a group of public sector workers. And when I speak to the private sector, I encourage them to get to know the landscape, so to speak, and understand the community, actually reach out to community representatives, community activists, and understand, you know, drill down to understand what the issues are in particularly the neighborhoods surrounding the area of development. You know, and I think every project benefits from that. Every city does it differently and every county does it differently. There's, you know, one could argue for some sort of what I'll, lack of better terminology, some sort of consultation process that could be integrated at the outset, but there are some potential pitfalls for that. Sometimes a project by necessity has to move so quickly and you really have to rely on your elected representatives. Those are few and far between, but nonetheless, they do exist. And were you to advocate for some sort of particular process, you have to still give your elected representatives the flexibility to be able to act on the community's behalf in those certain types of situations. But having the ability to learn about a project and to provide feedback to a development team and the local government team early on does have value. But again, keep in mind that in the P3 world, the idea that walks in the door is not necessarily the idea that gets built. There, you know, projects, most P3 developers, not all, but most are flexible enough to understand that they're going to have to adapt to the environment that they're going into. They can't bring a cookie cutter approach to their work. And so that adaptation and flexibility is a good thing as long as it's being responsive to community concerns. And those community concerns, you know, I hate to throw it on you all, but I agree with Lee, and yes, Colleen, I'm wrapping it up. You know, that it's
I'll
real.
wrap it up now. You were saying you agree with me. Keep going.
Yes, I'll stop right there. But you know, as I'm known to say sometime, we're a government of, by, and for the people, and that implies that there is a role for each one of us as citizens to engage in the process and not only holds our government accountable, but to take an active role when the opportunities avail themselves to share our voice and give our input and try and shape the policy that's being developed. Colleen?
Thank you so much. Great responses, and I'm glad to hear both of you reference, you know, elected officials and their important role. The idea of coming together to work through challenges and negotiating through the process. I mean, it can be tough. The application of political pressure, I think, can be done in a collaborative way. I think the residents can often feel that, you know, they have challenges from their position, but at the end of the day, there's a balance of power that, you know, you guys should talk, not me. So let me go to the next question. This, I think, is also one of those, we can't cover it in a minute or two, but it's important that we try just because of where we are on time. So we all know the example that we're talking about specifically with the city, which we're not going to talk about. We're not talking about that project, but just in general, the process for unsolicited proposals, how can they work better? And I believe, Alan, you are going first on this one. If you could keep it to 2 minutes max, and I will put my hand up when you're at a minute, okay?
Okay, so it's important for everyone to recognize that there's a huge difference between a solicited and an unsolicited proposal, and Lee can give you the statutory differences between them. In my mind, an unsolicited proposal is best when a project is being offered or suggested that was not being contemplated by the local government. Conversely, I'm not personally a big fan of unsolicited proposals when the government is already contemplating doing something because government has a clear idea and sort of has a sense of the direction it wants to go. And there are steps that the government should take as far as developing criteria, going so far as to develop a design criteria package is one end of the spectrum. But unsolicited proposals sometimes can stifle competition because if you accept it, the others in the market think that the unsolicited proposer might have an inside track. Not necessarily the case at all, but it's still a perception out there, and it could stifle some of that competition. You know, that I think that when I was talking about that consultation earlier, I think it really applies most to this situation of an unsolicited proposal. I think in a regular P3, you've already gone through a certain process. It's the unsolicited that's kind of sprung on you. And again, it doesn't mean that it's bad, but the bottom line is ensuring that the community has, I'd say, the community capacity and the sophistication to be able to understand what that proposal is, understand what the ramifications of it are, and then to be able to make the wise decisions necessary to either say yay or nay. Lee?
I think Alan pegged it really across the board. I'll just kind of touch on.
Stop there, Lee.
That was just, now let me tear it apart. I think he's right that unsoliciteds work best if you want to get ideas from the public sector market. You haven't really defined your project. And the question is, how do you make them work better? What I like to do when I'm representing the public sector, which is about 75% of my clients, is if we're going to consider an unsolicited, I like to workshop with developers one-on-one, get 5, 6, 7 of them to meet with our government staff one at a time to talk about the project, what it is that we want, should it look like, what does the market think that we could do with it, and brainstorm ideas. And what will end up happening is 1 or 2 of them are going to merge as the vision that we like. And then you can invite them to submit an unsolicited proposal. The reason I like that in the right situation is, number one, you're picking their brain, because they do the development and they could give you ideas. And then number 2, under the statute, if you don't do an unsolicited proposal, you have to do a full-blown design package, and then you're obligated by statute to keep your architect employed all the way through the development of the project. So you're adding a layer of cost that you could actually shed over to the private sector. If you go with the unsolicited proposal, you don't have to do any of that design or retain the architect. But a point I want to make, though, lest everyone get concerned about unsolicited proposals, that is not backroom deals. Statute requires it to go to public bid after you get the unsolicited proposal. So there is a straight up procurement process that goes with it, but at least you've developed your idea for the project with interactions with developers who do this stuff. And Alan is right that if it's not done right, the private sector, who is 25% of my clientele, does look at unsolicited as if it's a cook deal. And so you do get bids, but maybe not at the level you would if it was your own design package.
Colleen, can I throw in one other thing that Lee reminded me of, if you don't mind? Lee's right that there are savings to be had up front by not having to develop this design criteria package I mentioned earlier. The flip side of that is that you're kind of winging it and you're designing as you go. Sometimes there's value to that. We're engaging in what's called a pre-development process right now for the Joint Government Center, which is a more iterative, collaborative design process that allows us to have a lot more input rather than seeking proposals and saying yes to one and locking it in and whatnot. But one of the negatives is that without having clearly established criteria up front, it could lead to a lot of changes and potentially change orders down the road. If you don't have clarity in your design in an unsolicited proposal, and then you decide later on, oh, we made a mistake, let's go in this direction instead of this direction, that could be inexpensive from both a design and a construction perspective. So just another thing to consider. Lee, okay with that?
Yep, 100%.
All right.
Wonderful, clear, concise, concrete, precision at the beginning. And okay, so last question is not really, it was a wrap-up question. So rather than ask the question, because I think it was about achieving better balance in the partnership, which we kind of have already covered, final 30 seconds from both of you. Any key points that you haven't mentioned so far that you'd like to let our members know? And then if you could start taking a look at the chat, we've got time for maybe 3 questions. We're a little bit over time. So Marilyn has a question, James has a question. Michael, your question is specific to One Stop, so we may not be getting advice on that tonight. So, and Dr. Getz. So those are our 3 questions that we're going to take after your final 30-second key takeaways for the membership tonight. So Lee, you go first on this.
I'll tell you what I'd like to do, Colleen, if you're okay, is I'll pass the baton because I'm looking in the chat and there are a lot of questions here and I'd rather spend the time answering your members' questions.
Great.
That's exactly my feeling as well. Perfect.
Wonderful. So if you want to go back.
Why don't you select questions, Colleen?
Okay, so you can read Marilyn's question. If you want to, I can read it or you can read it out loud for the recording. The first assumption is that the project is worthwhile. This is unsolicited proposals and in the public interest and is something the city could not do on its own. If there is a difference in agreement on this, what is the recourse of those who disagree with the premise? That sounds like it was written by an attorney, Marilyn. Good job. So Lee, do you want to answer that?
I'm trying to understand who would be disagreeing with the premise. Are we talking about one of the partners or are we talking about the public?
Public.
The public, the recourse is really against the elected official when the next election cycle rolls around. I mean, that's the role that you have. There's always going to be disagreement in government. And
Wonderful.
so, you know, if the public just thinks it's not an appropriate project and the elected officials do, they're going to approve the project and then you get your recourse at the polls.
Thank you.
Marilyn, please keep the comments in the chat if you don't mind, so we can get through these. Next question is from James, and this is for you, Lee. I'm sorry, for Alan. How are performance metrics determined? The example that we spoke about with the faulty asphalt. How was it determined? What was wrong with the asphalt? What if there is disagreement about the metric?
So is this an Alan or a Lee question? Lee, why don't you start and I can talk a little about this too.
So what this question pertains to is what we call in the industry key performance indicators, KPIs. And what you want to do, in fact, I represent the city of North Miami, who's about to kick off a P3, and I'm meeting with them tomorrow to go over exactly this. When you define a project, you don't say, I want a city hall, or I want a tunnel to the beach, or I don't want, you know, any of these things that we're talking about here. You start with that, but then you got to define it. You know, Alan said earlier about the government center being net zero. That's a great example. That's objective. That's measurable. So energy, I want my energy cost to go down by 25%. I want my maintenance cost to go down by 33%. You know, so you identify your goals for the facility. You put as objective a measurement as you can on there that can be mathematically determined. And then in a really well worded P3 contract, if your private partner doesn't meet those expectations, then their payments get reduced. And that's how you control their behavior.
And what I'll add to that is that there's sort of the macro and the micro metrics. So, there's, like, as Lee talked about, the net zero, or, some other large performance. Then you can drill down to if a light bulb goes out, how quickly do they have to change it? And if someone spills something on the floor, how quickly does it have to be cleaned up? So you get down to a level of not only, so it's not only performance of the building and how quickly the elevator goes from one floor to another, or the air exchange frequency, but how the building is going to operate on a day-to-day basis. And some of this you can put out up front in like a design criteria package that I referenced earlier. If you don't have those types of criteria developed up front, then it's a matter for negotiation. And before you sign the final deal, you have to agree on anything and everything that you want to measure for the project. And what's important, Colleen, just give me a sec on this, and Lee referenced this earlier, and it's critically important, is if they don't meet the metrics, then they don't get the full payment that you're supposed to make every month. And so that's where that terminology availability payment comes from. If the facility or whatever it is that they're providing to you is not fully available for whatever reason it is, then you don't make that full availability payment back to them. And that's the way you hold the private sector accountable for their performance, not only in how they build the facility, but how they manage and maintain it as well.
Alan's point, just to say something really quickly to put an example on it, on 595, we probably all notice that there's a higher presence of road rangers, tow trucks along the highway, just kind of sitting there more than any other highway. Because like Alan was talking about with the spilled water, on that job, there is a metric about how quickly you're going to move broken down cars off the highway. And so the private sector responds by being ready for that. So like I said, you control behavior this way.
Strong agreement. Wonderful. And sorry, that was a question for you, Lee. So glad you both answered it. So I think we can take another 5 minutes, sort of, if we can. We're not going to get through all the questions tonight. I definitely want to get to Leanne's question. Leanne is asking, if we want to get more specifics on the state statute, who do we go to? And can you further describe the role of the elected official in the P3 process? So it's really 2 questions. I think those are both really high level and good questions for you guys to answer. And if we can get to the rest, great. If not, what I'd like to do is perhaps request that both of you come back at a future meeting, maybe even as soon as next month. This clearly is a topic that once you dive into it, it could take, I mean, you talk at conferences for an hour on this and barely scratch the surface, I'm sure. So the question from Leanne, who wants to take those questions?
Well, I would tell you, if you want more specifics on the state statute, talk to the guy on the screen next to me who helped write it, Lee. So that's my short answer.
Well, let me direct you to it. If you go to the website, it's flsenate.gov. That's the Florida Senate's website. And there's at the top, you can punch in a search term, just put in the statute number, which is 255.065. 255.065. That's a public-private partnership statute. It's brilliantly worded. You'll love reading it. Read it to your grandkids. It's really, really good. Anyway, if you have questions about it, I'm more than happy to field questions. I don't charge to take phone calls and answer questions. So happy to talk to anybody who's got a question.
So the role of the elected official is to, I would say, both monitor the process as it unfolds and to participate in the approval process during that process. There are several different decisions that have to be made. Do we issue a P3 solicitation? Do we accept an unsolicited proposal? If you accept an unsolicited proposal, there are certain requirements in the statute that you go through. It then has to come back to the elected body for a decision on at a minimum, selecting who you're going to work with. It's going to come back to you again at a minimum when you finalize a contract to work with that private sector partner on implementing the project. So there are different touch points along the way, and during those touch points and in between, the elected officials have the option to get as involved as they want in better understanding the project. There is a very important role for the appointed official or staff as well. They're the ones that are doing a lot of the grunt work. They're the ones that are evaluating for the elected proposals, different proposals that might come forth, doing the cost benefit analysis and looking at the pros and cons of different ideas that are being put forth to the local government. So there are a lot of different things going on. It's sort of a, I don't know, Lee?
No, I agree. I mean, to me, it's a loaded question about the elected officials' role, because I've seen many projects die because the people within the government who are running the job don't keep the elected officials as in the loop as they really should be. And then when it comes time for a final vote to award the contract, they're like, that's what we were doing all along. And so the role of a elected official on a properly administered P3 project is one where, for the most part, they guide and then step back. They let their staff do the majority of the shaping of the project under the directions that are set by the council. And then beyond that, it's kind of supervising how the process moves forward, make sure the project is developing in the parameters that the council wants, make sure the transparency is there and that the public's being served. And that at the end of the day, when it comes to them for a vote on the contract award, they are fully informed. They knew what was going on all along, and they're going to approve the project.
Wonderful. Last question. So we're not going to take James's second question. And Jana, will all the questions that aren't answered, we will feed to Lee and Alan, and hopefully they'll put something in response to us that we can share. But here's a last question. It's an interesting one from John Burns. Are there examples of P3s where after the contract ends, the city or municipality is stuck with unusable or out of date to the market facility or equipment? Have you seen that happen? I guess it speaks to the strength of the original contract or agreement.
It
well,
absolutely, go ahead, Lee, you start.
And it also speaks to feasibility studies and market expectations. I could tell you, I mean, maybe Alan knows some, but I don't know any that have failed at the time of turnback handover because of what we've been talking about all along about controlling behavior. And the idea of a P3 is at the end of the 30 years that John uses as an example, the project should come back to you as new basis because the level of maintenance is heightened through that whole 30 years. And so I'm not aware of any that really haven't done that, because by the time you're in operations and the contract's been written, the government's got control over the level of maintenance. Where there's failures is at the construction side, where costs don't work, where the project might not be used or utilized the way that people thought. So it's really the early stages of that 30-year period where you see more failures. But I'm going to tell you, and Alan will probably back this up, don't be afraid of that. You know, great example is a highway in Texas that's a toll road that was a very, very public failure. And because the contract was written so well, TDOT was able to buy it back. I don't remember what the dollars were, but like 25 cents on the dollar. And now they owned a brand spanking new toll road for a quarter of the price because the contracts were well drafted. The market feasibility was well done. The developer ended up not being the right developer, but the contract protected the owner. So right now, the level of sophistication of the owners has heightened, where I think that's more the norm.
Not much to add. There is a concept in the contract about, Lee referenced it, about the turnover metrics. So you'll aside from your ongoing O&M metrics, you'll have specific metrics on what you expect at turnover, the facility to be in a certain specific condition, it's performing a certain way or looking a certain way or whatever it might be. And the stronger your agreement on that, the much less likely this will happen. I think something else that's important, and we alluded to it, is the importance of monitoring construction by the private sector entity. And that might happen through, I mean, there are different ways to do it. You could hire an owner's representative or somebody else. There's an element of trust in a P3 process, but it's really a matter of trust but verify. And you want to make sure that the standards that you have established for the types of materials that are being used and the construction methodology that's supposed to be used, don't just rely on the building inspectors from the jurisdiction, but have your own folks out there on a daily basis ensuring that the quality of the product is there at the outset. That makes it much more likely that it will be a usable, not out of date facility by the time it's turned over.
Wow, could everyone that has benefited from the information that has been provided tonight just say so in the chat? And further, if you would be interested in having Lee and Alan come back, would you please just say yes?
No, say no. No.
Alan has other plans, sorry.
This was a tough topic to dive into, and you both did an excellent job, and we're just so grateful. I also want to take a moment to especially acknowledge Marilyn Mamano for bringing, and all the work she did behind the scenes to bring both of you here with us tonight. We're super grateful, and you're seeing the love in the chat. We'd love to have you come back. Super grateful to both of you. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and sharing it with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And for those that have questions, shoot them on over. If you guys, Lee and Alan, don't mind, we might follow up with a few additional questions for you. That's if you're willing.
Happy to do it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you so much. We are now going to go in back to the agenda, which is
Good night.
Good night, sir. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Lee. Thank you again. So we have our city manager giving us regular city updates on a monthly basis, for which we are also deeply grateful. And Chris, I'm going to hand the floor over to you to say hello. I'm glad you were here to listen to that P3 conversation, and you're welcome to share all that's going on with the city that you'd like all of us to know.
Excellent. So good evening, and thanks again for having me month to month. Great presentation. Worked with Alan for now years, and an excellent colleague, and I found ways, I think, to bridge a solid relationship very early on with Broward County, and we work together very well. So I'll lead with that. I don't think I got any pre-questions for this month, so I don't really have anything in any certain area that is defined. I'll tell you just by way of some updates. We're in that time of year where we're 12 days into the new fiscal year. When that happens, it's always that ability to move projects forward that we've been talking about for months and months and months. And we get to this magic date when all of a sudden money becomes available and we can start to move them forward. So excited with the amount of capital projects that are in this year's program budget. I think you're going to see more in this year by way of work in the field than we've done in previous years. We see that the Tunnel Top project is well underway, right in the middle of the downtown. We've just finished some infrastructure work. On tap this year very soon is the Riverwalk Seawall, which will be a longer project, but one that really needs to be done. So it's just that time of year where it gets exciting that we can take these projects that have otherwise been on the shelf and bring them forward. We are still full speed ahead with our parks bond implementation. You're going to see construction starting in those parks that are being designed through with community process, and you'll see that they move forward here soon. Sometimes the public wonders, well, we voted on a police building. Where is it? We're at about 75% design. So you were all talking earlier about how development projects work. 75% design is nearing a point that we can actually seek construction in the future. We do have one little parcel over there that we're working with to to figure out how we acquire, whether we acquire through some kind of agreement or whether we require through more of a court process. But that is important to the project because the building can't be built without us having that piece of property to build it on. I see Dennis asked the question, is the city going to digital water meters citywide this year? It's actually a 2-year deployment. And the funding is in place to move to it over a 2-year period. We reevaluated how we were implementing that, and it became obviously a priority of the commission. So rather than doing a tremendous amount of study like we always like to do, we study, and then we finally implement. This obviously was a desire to move forward quickly, so we changed the manner in which we're going to procure the AMI automated water meters, and we're just going straight to a competitive solicitation to go to implementation. We'll evaluate the meters along the way and in that process, but there's no reason to add an additional 6 to 9 months of study to a project if we know in fact that the commission wants to move it forward. So we've changed the manner in which we're going to address that and move it forward sooner. So that's good stuff. I wasn't around for the COVID discussion. If that was had at the beginning of the meeting, I can tell you we've gone back to a more conservative posture in our city buildings at the commission's direction. If you visit with us, we are still having in-person meetings. They've just asked that, well, we've got these rules in the state that we can't necessarily require, but we can strongly encourage. And to this point, we haven't had anybody who has been discouraged or chose to challenge us in wanting to bring some of the COVID requirements back to city facilities. Again, if we get ultimately challenged, I'll have to make a call as to how engaged we get. But so far, everybody's been great. Obviously, lots of projects on the horizon. It's a discussion that's not for the faint at heart. The one that you just had earlier with P3s and what solicited proposals are and unsolicited proposals are, and what normal procurement is. We've got lots of projects that are being talked about into the future. I don't want to take and make any assumptions as to where the commission will ultimately get to on any of those projects. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in the pipeline that they're reviewing, and we'll have to see what kind of solutions they get to and what kind of decisions they make as to what moves forward and what doesn't. Why don't I let me answer Marilyn's question, and then I'll just take it from whatever other questions the group might have as opposed to trying to guide it. So the question was the police station a P3 or a traditional city design build? It was more traditional procurement. It wasn't a design build necessarily, but we used the construction manager at risk model, which is a different model of a traditional procurement. So to answer the question, it was not an unsolicited proposal, but we had both an architecture firm as well as now a construction management firm, which is Moss Construction, managing the project. They manage to a guaranteed maximum price. And once we get to a certain level in design, we're able to guarantee that maximum price. And then that risk transfer happens that you heard in the discussion that led into my comments about transfer of risk. That risk at that GMP, that guaranteed maximum price, transfers to the construction company itself. So hopefully, Marilyn, that answered your question. Who else? Anything on any city topic tonight? I mean, I'll take, I know it's sometimes risky, but that's how we roll. Since developers are searching for land, is there a way to obtain a list of publicly owned property that may be subject to developer interest or P3s or other uses? So we know all of the land that we own, and we would have a list of that. We actually have several properties all over the city. I was quite shocked when I learned how many parcels we had. Some of them we come into ownership of because of lien foreclosures or other ways that it gets transferred to us. Some of the parcels we buy. If you followed along at the last meeting, we notified our intent to transmit a property we have over on Peters Road to the Housing Authority for an affordable and workforce housing project. That happens to not even be in Fort Lauderdale. It's in unincorporated Broward County off of Peters Road. And so if this group is interested in a list of public lands, I can provide it to Colleen and she can distribute it to the group. Who else has something? if I'm distracted, my Atlanta Braves have the bases loaded here with only one out in the background, and they're down 4-2 to the Milwaukee Brewers. So if you're wondering why I keep looking over my top of my computer, it's a natural distraction this time of year.
It's time for us to move on when we start talking baseball games. Come on. So actually the COVID update, it comes next. We went
Oh, okay.
meeting. So actually,
All right, so
Dr.
we've got a couple of questions here, and then we'll move on. I understand that the voucher stays for the homeless expired. And my chat keeps going. At the end of September, do you know how many people are transferred back to the streets? Yeah, so we've been working with some pretty intense case management on right now we're 19 or 20. So, you know, it's not a huge number. We're still trying to move them into permanent supportive housing. That's just a function of when the funding source that we use to pay for that homeless program that we had at the hotel expires. But the number, we've been working with very, very, very intense with the group that's there to case manage it. And the number is not that high. At one point we had gotten into the 80s, 90s, even 100 at some point. I think we were serving, and we've worked with most of those. I think we're down now to 19 or 20. How can our voice be heard? How can our voice be heard within our community? This is a great forum for that to happen. That forum exists every other Tuesday in most circumstances when the city commission meets. If you're not familiar and you have something you want to bring forward to the commission's attention that's not on a published agenda, we have neighbor presentations at every meeting. And I know they're not fully used because we have meetings where there could be neighbor presentations on and we don't have them. If you want to speak with the city commission and you want to be heard by them, that application is through the city clerk, just so we can calendar it. But on topics that are not subject to being on the agenda, we're ready to hear them regularly. So that's one other opportunity. But there's the Council of Fort Lauderdale Civic Associations is known to be one of the strongest voices in the city. So I almost think collectively the voice that this group has is even a better avenue. Any thought given to developing a P3 to update city buildings to green standards to add solar to city buildings? Any consideration of a city ordinance requiring solar on residences? So we've talked about that from time to time. There are certain energy incentives out there. We have been working with Broward County in a co-op form to offer information on solar if neighborhoods want to do it in sort of a collective buying, using the collective buying power of a whole neighborhood or a partial of a neighborhood to encourage solar. I'm not sure how. I'd have to think through how we could do that as a P3. I know that going forward, we have every intention of having some set of an environmental standard for the construction of new city facilities. I hate to step out there and say they're going to be LEED gold or they're going to be LEED platinum or they're going to be a certain standard net zero. Because really that's a decision that needs to be made as every facility is built, because sometimes you chase a bunch of points and spend a bunch of money and not get there anyway. And other times based upon building orientation or height or structure or things that are specific to a project, it becomes easier to become a certified green facility. So I know our commission is committed to the environment and committed to energy reduction where we can. We've made several of those proclamations publicly and even talked about how we reduced our carbon footprint at the last meeting further than it already is. So city's definitely thinking of that, of those things and mindful of those things. And we do them when we can. How can our community, okay, got that one. How can our community have a voice in how land is developed? Sort of the same answer I gave earlier is land development happens as a part of a public process, and your vote in that and very similar to what the attorney said earlier with the elected officials. A lot of that is really determined as your ability to pick who our elected leaders are. Is there any funding available right now for housing vouchers for families provided on a case-by-case basis for families exceeding 6 members in their family since they're too large to qualify for any of the shelters? So Janae, we do have there is an abundance of rental assistance money. I don't know if that would fit into the question you asked, if that would answer the question, but we have more rental assistance money than we can seem to give out. And we've tried to advertise it every way we can. We've been on social media, we've put out email blasts and just tried to generally talk about rental assistance. So if anybody knows anybody who is in need of rental assistance, I can certainly connect them with our Housing and Community Development Group that could help them make application for that. Again, we have more than we've been able to give out. So if that helps in that circumstance, please let me know. Since all departmental meetings follow suit with the commission's lead as of right now, will all meetings continue as hybrid, including Zoom availability for the remainder of the year? So I don't know exactly when we're going to have to go back to full-time in-person meetings. I do know that as long as the county continues, we're traveling right now under the county's declaration of emergency, and Bertha Henry is extending that. She has to do it every 7 days. And to this point, she has done it every 7 days. But we believe that's, at least that's what we're traveling under right now. That gives us the ability to go back to hybrid. So I don't know that we hold our own destiny for how we answer that question, other than to say, as long as Bertha continues to extend every 7 days, then I would anticipate we will continue to do hybrid meetings. And as long as the commission is doing hybrid meetings, then the boards and committees will have the ability to do hybrid meetings. And so that's the best answer I can give you there. And do I have some sense of boat show operations and crowd projections? You know, the boat show, even last year, was one of the leaders in in coming up with how to manage a special event during a COVID world. I believe that we will see bigger numbers this year than we saw last year. I believe that we will see more participants in the boat show than we saw last year. There were some that didn't come. So I think we're going to see an event that looks more like what we're used to. We've worked with the county, and the convention center option for the boat show is coming back this year, and it didn't exist last year. So there will be what is routinely known as the boat show there at Bahia Mar. I believe Super Yacht Village at Pier 66 will be back at the sales property, and I believe that the convention center will host more of that indoor environment where the toys and boat toys and depth finders and seats and propellers and all that stuff is that I don't know much about. So I think it'll be back to more of a normal boat show. And Janae says, forgive me, Chris, that the component doesn't help. I've tried that approach. They didn't qualify because they lack income. Okay, so let's deal with that then on a one-on-one basis rather than playing that one out here. So I'll email you. How about that? And we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Chris. I also like to refer people to Lauder briefs. I really love the Cliff Note version of what's going on. If you tried to keep track of everything the city is doing, it's a full-time job. Lauder briefs is a wonderful summary of city commission agenda and initiatives. So it's right on the fortlauderdale.gov website. You can sign up and look at prior briefs as well. And if you want to know how good our city is, I just want to share a brief little snippet about a city in North Carolina, not to be named because I don't actually know which city it is. They were deciding whether or not to implement solar panels for every roof in their residential community across the entire city. The city commission voted, they considered, they weighed, they voted against it. And the reason they voted against it was they felt that putting solar panels on every roof would take up too much of the sun. It would take up too much of the sun's energy. So in any event, our city is, that's a low bar. Chris, thank you so much.
So I just put it in the chat. My computer's like yelling at me that it's out of power. So if I like poof, go away, it's because I just didn't enjoy being here. Hopefully we're to the end. I'm going to just call in on my phone and listen to the COVID update. But
fantastic. We're going to transition.
They brought me a charger. Look at that. How about that?
Thank you. And we'll
she's even going to plug it into the wall. Uh-oh.
All right, there he went. Perfect timing. Dr. Rader, are you still with us? We rely on you every month for COVID updates. We're so grateful. Tell us we're through. Tell us there's not long COVID with breakthrough cases. Tell us whatever you want. Thank you, sir.
So thank you for having me again. I apologize that I missed the last meeting, but unfortunately that does happen from time to time. So let's first answer the question that's probably on everybody's mind. How are we doing with COVID? Well, the number of cases have dramatically decreased. If you look at the cases that are being reported by the state, we probably had our highest number somewhere in mid-August. And for those who remember, that was kind of the timeline that I had predicted that those cases were going to spike. The reason for that was simply, if you look at the distribution of cases, there seems to be a wave that is hitting us about every 4 months from peak to peak. We had one peak somewhere in January, then we had another peak in April, then we had another peak in August, literally almost every 4 months. If you look at that, and you look at some of the information that has come out of Johns Hopkins, they are predicting that there may be another peak this weekend, probably somewhere around December. So I don't think this is over, but right now we're looking pretty. The number of cases have come down dramatically. We're not back to where we were in June. The cases are still higher than that, but definitely better than what we were seeing in July, August, September. So there's been a steady decline in the number of cases. Now, these are new cases requiring hospitalization. Now, what we are seeing is still a fair number of cases of people that get COVID-19, but are managed on an outpatient basis. Why? Because they are vaccinated in part, or some people fully vaccinated, and they tend to have less severe cases of COVID-19, not requiring hospitalization. And obviously that's quite important because that does not put pressure on the healthcare system, number one. Number two, if you're not hospitalized, the chances of you having an adverse event and die is quite low. You know, usually there is a natural progression. I'm not feeling well, I'm going to the hospital. Next, you go to ICU. So clearly, you know, keeping all these people as outpatient is really, really good. Personally, in my practice, that's exactly what I'm seeing. Numbers in the hospital way down, numbers in the office less than they were before, but still steady.
That sounds very optimistic, Dr. Rader. So crossing fingers, staying hopeful. Any questions for Dr. Rader from anyone?
So somebody had a question there. Do vaccinations lead to mutations of more lethal or transmissible variants? Okay, well, as a doctor, the answer to that is natural selection, or, you know, selective pressure, actually, to be more accurate. So when we look at, let's just set COVID aside. COVID is kind of new, and the answers to that are quite complex. Let's look at influenza. This is something we're well aware of. We have studied this for well over 100 years. What we do know is that the strain we have this year is likely going to be different from the strain from last year and different from the strain we're going to have next year. That's why the flu vaccine gets re-administered on an annual basis. And also usually people get 3 or 4 different variants of the flu in one vaccine. Why? Because they want to make sure that we hit the right predicted organisms that are going to be available or around a few months later. Now, to come back to COVID, that's likely the same type of scenario that we're seeing. The virus mutates, there is selective pressure for the virus, and if the virus cannot get a hold in a population because number one, people have had that particular variant already, or people's vaccines are holding for that variant, eventually that variant dies out, but there is another variant that's going to be behind it. And that's exactly what we have seen. We have seen Iota, we have seen U, we have seen Lambda. So we have seen another bunch of variants out there, but right now, none of them appear to have the infectivity, the transmissibility that we're seeing with Delta. So that's encouraging news, and hopefully that holds for the next few months, giving all of us a breather. Meeting and outdoor Christmas parties. Oh boy, that's really, really hard. So right now, things look good, but we're not going to know when things start looking bad, because things looking back, it's looking in the rear view mirror. I wish I had a forward-looking mirror and that I could tell you, hey, don't go to the party next week because there is this thing that's likely going to start breaking out next week. We just don't know. Right now, things look good. You know, I would feel comfortable going to a restaurant. I've been going to indoor restaurants. My wife and myself went to an outdoor party for a birthday party. It was not indoor, it was outdoor. But still, you know, that there is a certain degree of comfort. Now that could change in a heartbeat if one of those new mutations comes out, and it's really, really hard to predict. Christmas parties are December usually. December is when the predicted next spike would be based on what I've read so far and based on the 4-month between waves. So who knows what December will bring. Yes, you can hold your head, Colleen. Any other questions? Non-vaccinated in other parts of the world. Well, other parts of the world is really kind of hard to predict. For example, let's take Africa, for example. Besides South Africa, we don't really know if there have been any major outbreaks in parts of Africa. Why? Because their healthcare system on a good day is in shambles. They say, hey, Mr. Ududu just died and we don't know what he died of. He's dead and his family is dead. Is it COVID? Is it something else? We don't know. Number two, Africa by and large has a much younger population than the US. Why? Because their life expectancy is shorter, and hence you have a much shorter life expectancy. So younger population means less susceptible to severe disease. Third thing, they tend to lead a much more outdoor type of lifestyle than we do in the US. You know, they're not going to have large parties indoor. They're not going to have shopping malls like we do. It's more going to be an outdoor market. It's more going to be outdoor events, hence, you know, less risk of transmission of disease. So it's very, very hard to compare, you know, something like what would happen in Africa versus what would happen in the US. Take Asia. Asia, once again, a much younger population by and large, they tend to wear masks. In Asia, it was tradition for decades. You know, if you have cold-like symptoms, you wear a mask and that's the expectation, hence less transmission of disease. So it's very, very, very difficult to predict and compare different environments. You know, we have, generally speaking, not necessarily the healthiest population in the US. Morbid obesity that we know is a major risk factor is very, very high in the US, much higher than in other parts of the world. So, you know, our outcomes may be skewed because of that as well. And that's kind of what we see. You know, it are the people that are elderly or people that have major comorbidities that tend to die in the hospital of COVID. It are usually not the younger, healthier people. So what else? Movie theaters in general, safe if vaccinated. I personally right now would feel comfortable doing that. I would wear my mask still, you know, I would wear my KN95. I always wear my KN95. I would feel comfortable doing it fully vaccinated. J&J booster. Okay, so right now the only one that has a booster is Pfizer. The reason behind that is multiple. Pfizer has been way ahead of the other manufacturers. Pfizer was the first one to get emergency use authorization. We're the first one to get full authorization, was the first and only one so far for children ages 12 to 18. They are likely going to be the first one to get approval, emergency use authorization for the 5 to 12. I think they may even already have it. So Pfizer is different, yet Pfizer appears to have the highest failure rate of the 3 vaccines that are commercially available in the US. If we look at the data that came out of Israel, people with triple vaccination, meaning the 2 vaccines and the booster, 7% of people hospitalized with COVID are fully vaccinated with booster. And that's data coming out of Israel. So Pfizer has some issues, definitely would recommend booster there. When it comes to people that got Moderna, they tend to do very well. It seems to be the one that has the best data so far. When it comes to Johnson & Johnson, no indication for a booster right now. Johnson & Johnson and Moderna are reformulating their vaccines. Probably there will be a booster at some point, but it will be a reformulated vaccine, just like the flu vaccine for, you know, COVID-21, not COVID-19, essentially. So still a process in development. Is ivermectin effective? Yes, it is. It has remained quite effective. Why? Because unlike the vaccines, it does not work on a specific spike protein. one article that was published in the last few months has looked at the mechanisms of action associated with ivermectin. There are 20 different mechanisms of action that have been speculated or confirmed for ivermectin use in COVID-19. So even if 1, 2, 3 of those mechanisms of actions become ineffective, the other ones are still effective. So yes, ivermectin has still been quite effective to this date. And Yelka, you crack us up. Okay, great.
That was me, and that's because I'm confused. I thought ivermectin was the drug that was the elephant tranquilizer, something or other that people were taking.
Okay. Oh, that is wonderful. Yes. The PR arm of the pharmaceutical companies have done a phenomenal job at this. So, for example, there was a hit piece that came out in Rolling Stone magazine that was speaking about a doctor that said he has never seen this many toxicities of ivermectin coming into his hospital, an emergency medicine physician. They have had to retract that article because the hospital he reportedly worked at said he hasn't worked here in months, and they have had no cases of ivermectin toxicity at their facility. Then there were other people that came out and said, oh, there has been an incredible increase in number of cases of ivermectin toxicity calls to the Poison Control Center. These pieces had to be retracted because when they physically reached out to the poison control centers, that was not the case. These were people taking veterinary medicines, number one, not human medicines. And number two, even there, the numbers were massively overblown. They spoke about 6,000 cases and there were only 70 cases reported to the Poison Control Center. I mean, you know, 100-fold increase. So these were PR hit jobs that is shameful, but you know, that's the world.
Yeah, one more question, Dr. Getz, and I will say this, Yelka, I'm not surprised she's better informed than I am. So thank you, Yelka, for that question. You've got 2 questions. I think just maybe answer 1 or 2 of the large number that you've got there. You could choose.
Okay, so professional organizations, as far as ivermectin use, if you look at the CDC has taken the most even and balanced approach. They say they went from do not use it outside of clinical trials to saying there is currently insufficient data for or against. Why? The CDC is the one that has had the latest review of their data. Sorry, the NIH, sorry, not the CDC, the NIH said not for, not against. They have reviewed the data and they cannot no longer say no, but they can no longer say yes. The World Health Organization has taken the same approach. If you look at the World Health Organization, for example, they say remdesivir, which is the mainstay of treatment in the US, the only fully approved medication for the treatment of COVID-19, the World Health Organization says don't use it, it's ineffective. So right now the waters are incredibly, incredibly muddy. If you look, for example, at the new drug from Merck, they came out with a new antiviral medication that they're going for emergency use authorization. Their studies only had about 700 patients in the entire study, 700 patients. They reduced the hospitalization risk from 14 down to 7%. Well, I can tell you with ivermectin, my hospitalization risk is not 7%. It's way less than that. But, you know, I don't have the marketing arm and PR arm of Merck behind me pushing for this. So, you know, money speaks and clinical science is being blissfully ignored.
So wonderful. Fantastic questions, everyone. Dr. Rader, absolutely wonderful. Really super questions tonight. Barb, I'm glad you asked that question. I had the same one. We really have to move on. We're over our time. We hope to see you next month. We'll double check with you. Thank you. We are very, very grateful. Please share your love with Dr. Rader in the chat as we move on. Thank you, sir. And we have 3 items on the agenda left. One is to welcome our new council member from the Golden Heights Civic Association. So a newly formed or newly officially recognized neighborhood association and a new member. And I saw this card in the store and I had to take a picture of it. And this is Michael Albetta's famous saying, unity in the community. So with that, I want to introduce Sharon Alexander, if she's here, and she'd like to just say hello and tell us in less than a minute a little bit about her neighborhood. She doesn't
Hi,
have,
Hi, my name is Sharon Alexander. I'm from the Golden Heights community. We're one of the smallest community over here in the Dillard Rock Island zone, and I'm very happy and excited to be here. There are so many things I'm learning, and there are so many things that you guys will be able to teach me, and I'm looking forward to it.
wonderful, Sharon. We're so grateful and thrilled that you were here. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here tonight. And just so you know, we don't always go over on these meetings. We try to, but tonight was a really robust and important conversation about P3. So I'm sure we'll be talking offline. Thank you so much. All right, folks, last two items. We have a treasurer's report, and our treasurer is excused tonight. So we're just going to show you the top level numbers. Our coffers are at 14K, 14,021.5. And, you know, this is in reverse order. So the last payments or last member fees are listed at the end. So you can see we had two member association payments in September from River Garden Suiting and the Landings. So any questions about the treasurer's report? All right, super. So last order of business from the board, we'll take any discussion about the meeting minutes from September's general meeting. And if no discussion, may I call for a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
I'll second.
I second.
Any opposed? All right, minutes pass. With that, we are at the end of our official meeting. We're going to call for an adjournment. Before we do, I just want to thank all of you again for taking all your time tonight. We'll follow up with questions for Lee and Alan. And if we can also feed the questions to Dr. Rader that were left unanswered as well. With that, I'd like to say goodnight. Happy birthday again to Betty and to Kathy. And we'll see you all next month.
Thank you,
Thank
Colleen.
you.
Good
Thank
evening.
you,
All right,
Colleen.
thanks a lot, Colleen.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a very good evening.
Hi, everybody. Hi,
Everyone be
Mike.
Hi,
safe.
everyone. Thank you,
Michael.
Colleen.
Happy
Bye.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm going to stop recording so you all can sing off tune. Hold on.
Oh, my